Okay, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming today. This is more than we expected. My name is Ricky Ellison. You're at our 5th Congressional Roundtable discussion where we're going to discuss the futures of missile defense systems. I am the chairman and founder of the Missile Defense Advocacy Alliance. That was founded in 2003, right after the withdrawal from the ABM Treaty. I've been involved with missile defense for over 32 years, going way back in the college days with Dr. William Teller and Dr. Bill Van Cleve, and their advisory role to Governor Ronald Reagan to initiate the beginnings of our modern day missile defense systems. Our organization has grown considerably. We're about 14,000 members around the country. We have advocated in 22 countries and 46 states. We hold pretty prestigious events in recognizing our warfighters and our ally warfighters. We've held 19 of those, 9 of them with different allied partners in 5 different countries. We have been visiting missile defense sites and U.S. bases, I think about 368 visits so far. We just came in from Clear Air Base Station and PACOM earlier this month. We built a couple of memorials. So we are all about the evolution and the deployment of missile defense systems for our nation. We sincerely believe it makes the world a safer place with that deployment. So as a nation, we have made incredible technological gains in missile defense over the past 20 years. Hit-to-kill technology, once thought impossible, is now a regular occurrence. We as a nation, specifically the Missile Defense Agency, are perfecting increasing reliability and confidence of existing technologies that are deployed today. These technologies and systems that are deployed today throughout the world have helped with deterrence, regional stability, defending and protecting America's and our allies' populations and armed forces, and keeping us safe. They have justified their investment and are being used as tools to de-escalate conflicts around the world and help to keep peace today by our president. Today's systems, however, can be and could be and should be much more effective and more efficient if new technologies were applied. New technologies have the potential to revolutionize the way we think about, engage, and apply missile defense to the growth of ballistic missiles and their next steps from multiple and maneuvering warheads to hypersonic, non-ballistic delivery platforms. Missile defense new technologies can leap ahead generational and be a game changer in a complex world of evolving threats, can change the deterrence, change the defense for our nation and to our allies. Today we're going to discuss 2 major technical leaps within the broad spectrum to change current missile defense. The first is to have persistent survival, situational awareness, tracking, and discrimination sensors globally that will enhance all of our missile defense systems. The second is the development of directed energy weapons on air-based platforms. We're honored to have 4 of our nation's top experts to present to you for about 15 minutes each, and we'll follow up with ample time for your questions and interaction with them. Please let me now introduce our presenters. Our first one to my right, Lieutenant General Samuel Greaves. He is the Commander, Space and Missile Systems Center, Air Force Space Command, Los Angeles Air Force Base. He controls about $6 billion of budget and has over 5,000 employees around the United States. As the Air Force Program Executive Officer for Space, General Greaves manages the research, design, development, acquisition, and sustainment of satellites and the associated command and control systems. To his right, Dr. Kelly Hammett is the Chief Engineer of the Air Force Research Lab Directed Energy Directorate. He is one of our nation's top minds in the development of directed energy in a number of sectors, including BMD applications. To his right is Mr. Ritter, Program Executive for Command, Control, Communications, Computers, Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance for the Missile Defense Agency. And to his right is Mr. Richard Matlock, who is the Program Executive for Advanced Technology for the Missile Defense Agency. In his position, he is the leading development of the next generation of cutting-edge missile defense technology. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is an educational forum. It's open, it's relaxed, and we're going to start out with Lieutenant General Greaves, who also was the previous deputy director of MDAA.
They take it there. Just deputy. Thanks, Ricky. Can you all hear me in the back? That's the first question. Nod your head. Good. Well, good afternoon. Thanks to Ricky Ellison for the invitation and to the entire Missile Defense Advocacy Alliance for putting this event together. It's a great opportunity to engage and pass on information. You know, ballistic missile defense is both a critical capability and mission, and strategic missile warning is a key component of that capability. So today I'd like to talk about the importance of space assets as a critical part of our missile defense architecture for both today and tomorrow. Space capability is a key component from the beginning to the end of the missile defense, what we call the F2T2EA kill chain. Find, fix, track, target, engage, and assess. And within our Air Force, the men and women of the Air Force Space Command, our contractors and our mission partners, acquire, field, and operate global, all-weather warfighting capability from space, including overhead persistent infrared capabilities, protected strategic and tactical communications, position, navigation, and timing capability, and space launch capabilities, i.e. rockets, to place these warm-waiting capabilities into orbit. We also routinely engage with the Missile Defense Agency in developing target support for missile defense tests. Each and every one of these, all of these, play critical roles in missile defense. As Ricky mentioned, as the SMC commander and the Air Force Program Executive Officer for Space, I have two bosses. General John Hyten, the commander of Air Force Space Command, and Dr. William LaPlante, the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Acquisition. General Hyten tells us in his commander's intent that priority 1 is winning today's fight, priority 2 is preparing for tomorrow's fight, and priority 3 is taking care of our families and our airmen. As acquirers, to do that, we have to achieve a balance, and I'll talk about balance a little later, but we have to achieve a balance between leveraging past successes and the current production mode that we are in now to lower costs of today's programs. We do that while also boldly moving forward with the new systems needed to be responsive to tomorrow's threat environment. Now, General Hyten is not the only one telling us this. We're also hearing it from the Office of Secretary of Defense and the Congress. This balance is at the heart of what the Department's Better Buying Power 3.0 addresses. Specifically, how do we keep today's programs affordable? How can we achieve affordable dominant capabilities for tomorrow? How do we leverage the advances we know the commercial sector has made without breaking our programs of record that are performing well? The message we hear from the Air Force leadership is also consistent with this. Dr. LaPlante has told us that his priorities are to, and there are 5 of them, continue to get high priority programs right and to keep them on track, to continually improve relationships and transparency with stakeholders, such as OSD, the Congress, industry, and our labs. We need to own the technical baseline for our important programs. We need to continue to implement the highest impact, better buying power parts to achieve best program outcomes. And we need to build a long-term strategy, resilience to peer competitors, through experimentation and innovation. So it is important to get today's program right. And to do so, we must work together as a cohesive missile defense community to reach that conclusion. And one of the best ways to protect the homeland, I believe, and our partners, is through close collaboration with our sister services, the Missile Defense Agency, and other defense agencies. So probably one of our most visible contributions to missile defense is through the overhead persistent infrared capabilities provided by the Legacy Defense Support Program, satellites, and our newest space-based infrared system satellites. We have 2 SBIRS satellites in geostationary orbit, 22,000 miles out in space, and we have contracted for another 4. We have made steady progress in developing our ground systems to prepare for the launch of the next GEO satellite in July of 2016. We also have hosted SBIRS sensors in highly elliptical orbits for enhanced forward coverage. Air Force Space Command's missile warning systems integrate with the Missile Defense Agency Ballistic Missile Defense System. SBIRS provides timely missile launch notification to the BMDS for situational awareness, alert notification, and threat assessment, supporting both theater and ground missile defense. These messages provide valuable information to MDAA and the operational missile defense defenders. SBIRS's capability is a key component of the GMD system, the ground-based missile force defense system, its fire control system, by providing information on warhead counts and data transfer lethality to mid-course radar tracks. This process is a key step in planning GBI engagements against inbound threats to the cones. Lastly, the SBIRS enterprise supports the MDAA mission areas by providing infrared data for purposes of independent processing. I believe we continue to have a solid relationship with the Missile Defense Agency that is actively supporting operations and test events. One recent joint achievement was a successful demonstration of taking messages from the SBIRS program and passing pertinent data to the C2BMC system, the Command Control Battle Management and Communication System, and the GMD elements within the missile defense architecture. These key messages assist C2BMC in associating missile tracks into a single launch event. Very key capability. And as we move into the future, we are studying multiple architectures to determine the right solution for a survivable, resilient, and cost-effective next-generation space-based missile warning system. We are moving forward with upgrades both to our space systems and to our ground control systems, while working very closely with the Missile Defense Agency to ensure that we have a seamless transition and non-degradation of OPIR data to the BMDS as our remote sensing director delivers block upgrades to these satellites. Recognizing and adapting to changes require what we call our space modernization initiatives. And they enable us, and they also inform improvements to both our current systems and our future systems. The next generation capabilities will enable warfighters to track targets faster, which will allow commanders to keep our troops on the battlefield as well as our nation and our allies safe. SMI matures potential technology upgrades at the component and system level for future space and ground architecture affordability and capability enhancements. As one example, the SMI's Wide Field of View, WFOV, demonstration jumpstarts SBIRS modernization efforts by collecting data sets, building and tuning algorithms to take advantage of large format focal planes that will greatly improve global and theater missile defense capabilities. Keynote, we're also working to fuse our OPIR and space situational awareness data streams to the Joint Space Operations Center in a proactive space domain awareness paradigm. Finally, the SBIRS follow-on AOA analysis of alternatives, with participation from the Missile Defense Agency and other stakeholders, has evaluated the next generation of OPIR capability to accomplish and support the missile warning, missile defense, technical intelligence, and battle space awareness missions. So while most of you are probably aware of the role SBIRS plays in missile defense, space-based communications are also a critical component of the missile defense mission. The nation's nuclear command and control system, NCCS, relies on terrestrial, airborne relay, and satellite links to detect and transmit voice, video, and data, and the protected SATCOM constellations are one avenue to provide that sort of data to the National Command Authority. Our protected satellite communication constellation consists of 5 legacy Milstar satellites and 3 of our next generation advanced extremely high frequency satellites. We currently have another 3 AHF vehicles on contract. Together they provide part of the backbone of strategic communications, giving our national command authorities, the President and the Secretary of Defense, the means to authorize the use of nuclear weapons in a crisis, if required, and to prevent unauthorized or accidental use. The protected SATCOM constellation provides survivable, anti-jam communication services for strategic forces and theater defense missile forces to receive and transmit what we call integrated tactical warning and attack assessment. This information is transmitted to correlation centers and forward to key users. So connected to these protected SATCOM constellations are satellite terminals that are also interoperable, not only between different agencies and military branches of our military, but also to our international partners. One such terminal is SMART-T, Secure Mobile Anti-Jam Reliable Tactical Terminal. And it supports the joint service, primarily in the Army. SMART-Ts are nodes on the C2BMC network, which, as I mentioned earlier, is an integral part of the current and future BMDS capability. We're also examining future missile defense SATCOM requirements through Protected SATCOM Services, PSCS. And that system is also going through an analysis of alternatives. And it is evaluating how to affordably meet future protected SATCOM capabilities that are essential to missile defense in the nuclear, contested, and benign operating environments. It is also important to mention how the Global Positioning System, GPS, integrates with missile defense. Most people are familiar with GPS because it provides a navigation service. The other key services provided by GPS are timing and positioning. Early in our quest for space exploitation, submarine-launched ballistic missiles, SLBMs, were the original motivation for satellite navigation. These ballistic missiles can continue to be a small but critical component of GPS users and its stakeholders. It turns out that what is useful for ballistic missiles is also useful for missile interceptors. As you may know, ballistic missiles and launch interceptor vehicles generally rely on inertial systems for navigation. However, as the technology matures, multiple ballistic missile defense platforms will use GPS for its timing and positioning services. These MDA systems will use GPS for both timing and positioning, as I said. Switching point for a little bit here. SMC's Space and Missile Systems Center's Advanced Systems and Development Directorate also plays a key role in developing the future of missile defense. In early 2007, we supported the launch of an airfield infrared experiment EndFire satellite for missile defense imaging tests on a Minotaur-1 rocket, followed by the launch of 2 ICBM-class targets the following year for the first ever satellite flybys for near-field imaging by the EndFire satellite. That's another important way we work with MDA. We not only develop space-based capabilities, we also support MDA's efforts to develop targets and space launch capabilities. Over the past 25 years, we have provided over 50 boosters and pull-up target systems for missile defense testing, ranging from Patriot missiles to THAAD to Aegis, Arrow, and GMD, interceptor and sensor system tests. We provide the missiles, we provide the targets. Just want to make sure that's clear. This included 4 ICBM-class targets as well as the interceptor motors for the initial GMD flight tests. We continue to provide flight-certified Minuteman motors to MDA for use in missile defense targets. We've also been assisting in the OSD-led OPIR AOA, part of which examines missile defense support, so that we can continue to provide the resiliency and affordability of our SIVers and our OPIR enterprise. So in conclusion, our number one priority, as Joe Hyden mentioned, is to win today's fight and protect the homeland. We believe we accomplish that through integrating a wide range of space capabilities and collaborating with our sister services and the Missile Defense Agency. And I think the remainder of the panelists may be able to tell you a lot more about that. So I'm going to stand by for your questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Lieutenant General Graves. Our next presenter, Dr. Kelly Hammett.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me here to speak to you today. I represent the AFRL S&T portfolio for directed energy, weapons, science, and technology. I work for the director there down at Kirtland Air Force Base, and it's our job to manage roughly $150 million a year annual portfolio enabling science and technology for directed energy weapons applications. So 150 million, 6 billion. You can see who the big dog at the table is here. A little bit more about myself. Personally, I spent roughly 6 years working for the Missile Defense Agency. I worked on the airborne laser program, built the beam control system for the ABL program, retired from active duty as chief engineer for the ABL program. So I'm very familiar with the last generation of technologies that we tried to fly for missile defense applications, and kind of what went right there and what went wrong, and so I'm in a pretty good position to help shape the next generation of future technology development. And so I'll get to that kind of to wrap up is what we learned out of ABL and where we're headed in the future. But a couple more generic things. I work for the Air Force Research Laboratory. We have basically a $2 billion a year S&T investment. So roughly, just under 10% of that we apply to directed energy S&T. And it's our job to analyze Air Force gaps and needs, and then lay out science and technology roadmaps that can enable systems and applications to meet those gaps. We also, however, work collaboratively with other OSD services and agencies like the Missile Defense Agency, the Army, and the Navy, in collaborative partnerships to develop a number of these critical and enabling technologies. Given that a fairly small amount of funding, we have to build those partnerships, and we have to have collaborative efforts to try to move the technology ball forward. Before I get into more details about the specifics of directed energy and missile defense, I just want to mention going on today across town, where I was this morning, is a directed energy summit. And so not just in missile defense applications, but Air Force applications, Navy applications, Army applications, there's a realization that directed energy technology is essentially at a tipping point where the warfighters pull the technology maturation and development that can enable some of these capabilities, and world events is conjoining to make it pretty critical that we make some nationwide decisions about the priority of directed energy, the resources that we assign, and then taking on some of the policy issues that have traditionally been hindrances to demonstration and fielding and then operational employment of these systems. Okay, so back to the AFRL S&T portfolio. We do laser weapon systems in my directorate. We do high power electromagnetic weapon systems in my directorate. We manage the two large Air Force ground-based observatories for space situational awareness in my directorate, and then we do some weapons modeling and simulation in my directorate, responding primarily to some of the challenges that were issued by the Defense Science Board in 2007 that says everybody promises directed energy solutions, but they don't always match them well to the mission or the application, or they don't necessarily take into account other capabilities that might be there. So we've developed the capability over the past several years to, with some high level of fidelity, trade and model and look at synergistic employment of directed energy applications with other kinetic and other phenomenological processes. So that's kind of a summary of our overall portfolio. Now, what did we do in ABL, and what are we doing today to enable the next generation of directed energy for missile defense applications? Several lessons learned out of the ABL program, but from a technology perspective, probably three stand out as the biggest ones, and one is the suitability, or let me start with performance. Okay, so for strategic applications like missile defense, boost-based missile defense in particular, if you want to reach out long ranges, hundreds of miles to take out missiles, you need a very powerful laser, and you need a large aperture optical system to be able to project to sufficient lethality to meet those ranges. So that's why on ABL we had a megawatt class system and a 1.5 meter aperture hung on the front of a 747. What did that allow us to do? I can't talk actual numbers here in this forum, but it allowed us to project very high power to long ranges and actually demonstrate boost-based kill of theater class ballistic missiles in 2010. So the performance for a strategic application like that was enabled by coil technology, chemical oxygen iodine laser technology that was invented in the predecessor of AFRL many years ago. Okay, so it had performance. What didn't it have? Well, I mentioned it was integrated on a 747. So this was huge, size, weight, and power implications for this type of technology, and some kind of nasty hazardous chemicals, and some limited magazine capability enabled by how much chemical fuel supply you could carry on a platform. Okay, so you're on 747, you're also worried about survivability. This is a big platform. And then we probably the third and final thing we learned out of that program from a technology development perspective was that flying at transonic speeds with separated airflows and shock waves around an optical aperture is a significant science and technology challenge. And that was a performance limiter, which limited the effective range of the ABL, and it was the #1 performance limiter. Both the distortions to the propagating beam, as well as essentially the buffeting that was engendered on the airframe and the turret, tends to spread the beam around, defocus it, and defeat the whole purpose of having this highly intense focused beam at range. So in today's current generation of technology development at AFRL, we have a number of programs to work on what we therefore call the Aero Effects program, where we're looking at wide field of view, optical apertures, and being able to predict and design systems and compensate for those deleterious effects of the aerodynamic flow across a surface. So that's really a critical enabling technology that you need if you're going to fly in transonic or supersonic flight regimes. So anything at the speed of sound or faster, that's a critical enabler. The second thing we're doing, and have been doing this at the kind of the direction, suggestion of the Defense Science Board as well as others, is a transition away from the gas chemical laser technology to solid state laser technology, electrically driven lasers. And what this allows you to do, while not being able to currently achieve megawatt classes of power, but at potentially hundreds of kilowatts of power, you can get rid of a 747 cargo payload requirement for your laser device. You can put these on more relevant, survivable, mobile, agile, tactical platforms, and that's the type of enabling science and technology work that we're doing in AFRL. And there's multiple ways you can pursue this technology. So in partnership with DARPA and the Missile Defense Agency, advanced technology folks, Mr. Matlock, et cetera, we have some collaboratively funded efforts to push the industrial base, to push some of this technology development, to scale these systems up in power to relevant tactical, and then maybe in the more longer term, strategic ranges of applicability, and then start integrating them on air platforms. Because one of the other challenges you face, and one of the other things we learned from AFRL, from ABL, sorry, was everybody's saying, oh, the enabling component technology exists, and it's LTRL6. Putting it on an airplane and flying it is just an engineering activity, and a very expensive engineering activity that took most of my life, my adult career, to do that. So going from laboratory demonstration environment to a relevant flight environment, dealing with the aeromechanical, aero-optical, constrained size, weight, and power, and thermal environments is a significant challenge, and we're putting a fair amount of science and technology investment into integrated system demos in those relevant environments, so that when the Air Force or the Missile Defense Agency or others is looking to harvest those technologies to meet a military capability, there's not such this huge gap. But we've gotten in the right environment and demonstrated that these things are feasible and achievable. So I think I'll pause there. That's probably enough about where we are, and hold for questions.
Yeah. Mr. Ritter, as soon as I figure out how to turn it on. Thanks, Ricky, and I'm glad to be here. One of the my portfolio, I'm responsible for C2BMC, which General Greaves talked about. I'm also responsible for all the sensors, and including space and ground sensors that are Missile Defense Agency. So I have stuff scattered from 17 time zones from the middle of the Far East to Guam to full range of environments. So I got that perspective I'm going to bring to the table. I'm going to kind of focus on the space sensors because that was kind of the theme of this group originally. When I was here a week ago, it was kind of interesting. Most people don't even realize that we're tied into space today. As Joe Greaves pointed out, we're in space. And so it's key and a critical element as part of our fire control processes. And one theme I think you're going to get from all four of us today, we're very collaborative across the agencies. We're really interdependent on each other. I'll bring up that more later on. Based on the demos we've been going through, particularly using the MDAA out at Colorado Springs, we pretty well demonstrated that there's even a bigger future and contribution from space in the future, and that we're going to try to take advantage of that. One of the other note I hope you take away from here, I constantly run into this, it's either all space or all radar. The fact of the matter is we need a combination of both. I hope you get that message on this slide. There are certain things that radars do very well, and there's things space do to its location, they do very well. It's the tying the two together with the assets that makes it the most effective missile defense we have. And one example is we demonstrated that with Aegis launch on OPIR sensor data from overhead. We were able to increase the battle space of that Aegis to like about 4 times from what it could get just working off its own organic sensor. So we know we can do it. We demonstrated the early TRL. Now it's just a little engineering, a lot of money, but we'll make sure it will work. The other thing is, while we concentrate when we talk about space and other assets, immediately we think about launching new things. The fact of the matter is, what we really need to do also in the near term is take advantage of data that's already coming down from all the assets, whether they belong to the IC community or the DoD community. And we're heavily involved in that. It's not as sexy as launching a new asset, but it's the algorithms and the processing and that stuff that allows you to squeeze every ounce of data you can get out of your space assets that are out there. And we have a couple of those operations already in effect. We have this thing called ballistic missile OPIR architecture, which allows you to take the data that you typically get from SIVRs and get the error basket considerably shorter, smaller, that allows us to do a lot more things from multiple sensors. And then we have the joint OPIR ground system. It's a collaboration, you'll hear this collaboration again, collaboration between Air Force Space Command and SMC and the National Geodetic Agency folks. You know, right now we got a bunch of stovepipes that are coming down for real-time data. And next year we'll have gotten together and fielded a capability which I don't care if the data comes down to the Intel side or our side, we'll be exchanging OPIR tracks from both sides of the house. So that allows us to take advantage of everything that's up there. The other thing I want to bring up is we got to start thinking about sensors from an enterprise approach. I'm not a space sensor. I'm not a warning sensor. I'm a sensor. And it's where the data goes that makes that clarification. We've made great strides trying to work out on the radar side, for example. I supply data for space situational awareness. They provide radar data to do missile warning and missile defense. We're going to carry that same theme through in the space community as well. As Joe Greaves pointed out, we collaborated together on the SIVRs AOA. We know we have to do more work in that area, but the idea is we really need to exchange data across the communities, and that's the way we get costs down, and that's the way we get resilience, and that's the way we help on the survivability. So those are the key issues I want to bring up. Why space? Why do we go there, other than it's a nice place to be? And that's one of the things, it's location, location, location. Right now with the sensors, we can get boost data from the SIVRs, or we get radar data on the terminal end. There's a whole space in between in the mid-course where we really need to keep track of what's going on up there. They take invasive maneuvers, they do all kinds of things. We need birth to death tracking, and that's one feature, a key feature that space provides. Flexibility. One of the disadvantages of radars, and I own both, so I can pick on either one, is that you got a fixed element that's focused in one area. The enemy changes tactics, or we get a new enemy over time. I don't have the flexibility to reshift around. Space gives you the flexibility to go handle those situations. There's also, you might hear a lot about the vulnerability of space, but let me tell you something. ground is not very safe either. I would argue that there's a lot of resilience provided by space and capabilities that we can get off it. And particularly, it frees us from relying on host nation agreements for our location of our assets. So space has got a lot of attraction for us. Conjunction with other sensors, that we pointed out, is you really want to marry both technologies. So, for example, a radar can get saturated. A radar gets a lot of stuff coming to it. It has to sort it all out. But if I get a vector from a space asset that says it's going on this trajectory, I can throw a lot of this other stuff out. And that allows me to focus the radar antenna, increase the range, and equally important, be able to handle large raids when I have a lot of debris. It's always good to have the dual phenomenology. You know, the weapon system is looking at it in an IR perspective, but if I have an IR aspect from space, that helps out too. And as I pointed out before, we really need an enterprise approach, and what we've been doing now is extracting the data out from every space sensor we can, fuse it together, because even space has got some location issues we got to solve. If I can get it from everybody, I get the best of all worlds. So we're doing that today. We're doing some key experiments, and they're kind of leading the way. One of the things is cost that we all talk about. We're looking at the area where the civilian commercial world can provide platform services to. So one of the things we're looking at is a post-intercept assessment. You know, once the interceptor goes out, it's usually over an area of the ocean where you don't have any other sensors. You want to be able to have confirmation that you intercepted for obvious reasons. Some being like be able to call home and say we got it. The other one is, do I do it for shot strategy, and do I instead of shooting out one sensor after another, I can make a decision. What we're looking at is we're commercially hosting a IR sensor on a commercial bus that allows us to get the data back. We can take advantage of it, and the basic infrastructure cost that supports those satellites is now borne by all the customers, and we're basically getting a ride and being able to leverage all that other capability that was out there, and hopefully that'll be promising. We've also looked at, we have the SDSS, there's two birds that are up there that are under our control right now, and we're taking advantage of it to understand how we would do satellite tracking in the mid-course range at lower altitude. But we realized, once again, in the idea of collaboration, while the bird is up there, it has the potential to support other folks as well. So we have a working relationship with the JSPOC and the Intel community, and we take tasking, and we're able to support the TI mission or the battle space awareness missions on the ground. Because anything that we come up with in the future due to cost, we've got to have a way to collaborate, have multiple missions on these assets in order to make them cost affordable. So really, like to sum it up, as I said, it's the new technologies are coming out. Some of it, a lot of it's on the ground. You may never see it. But my sense is where we're going in the future is, especially on the space area, we're going to find more and more cross-mission partnership. I know with General Greaves and General Hyten, we're working partnerships between our space platforms in the future. And that's the way that the whole enterprise is going to have to go if we're going to have an affordable solution for the taxpayer. I'll pass it to Rich.
So thanks, Rich.
So as Ricky mentioned, my portfolio is essentially the science and technology arm of the Missile Defense Agency. So I think I've probably got the most exciting job in the Missile Defense Agency with the least money. And we'll talk a little bit about how I use those resources and where we're focused on here. Now my portfolio is broad. And so my primary challenge is with the resources allocated then to capitalize on the creativity and innovation that we find in our in academia, in our small businesses, in our large prime contractors, as well as our vendor base. looking at ways that we can apply that creativity and innovation to give us the capability that we know that we're going to need in the future. So I'm not going to talk about what might be happening here in the next few years, but I'm going to focus on the emerging threat and where we will be going to get capability beyond this decade and into the next decade. So I'm going to get focused on a few key areas where I see there's great opportunity. And as we look at the emerging threat, where we went before, and I'm going to play on that theme as well as echo some of the themes that my colleagues and partners have discussed here, is in some cases we're going to be going back to the future. So a few years or so ago, the threat appeared to be emerging rapidly in the theater, in the region. And so we focused our game plan and our overall strategy in missile defense on countering that original threat. And what you see today, as we're deploying in this decade, then with the European phased adaptive approach and other, is essentially the result of those focused investments. More recently, as you've heard over the last couple of years or so, listening to what's going on in the department and especially in missile defense, is we're looking more to an emerging threat against the homeland. And so I'm going to focus some of these resources then on filling the gaps that we see in our system that may make our homeland defense more effective in the next decade. So if we look at where the missile defense system is today, after we get past the initial space-based warning and missile launch, and the space communications and ground communications that Rich uses to communicate all that, our sensor architecture is primarily focused on a set of terrestrial radar deployed, either on land or on sea. The tracks of those radar then are communicated to the shooters, sensors to the shooters through Rich's networks. And our interceptors are primarily mid-course and terminal phase interceptors. And so that presents some challenges as we see down the road for an emerging threat. And it's important for us in the technology community then to look at ways that we might address that threat. So I'm focused on addressing the warfighter needs of the future. And so my goal here is to look at ways that I can make investments that address his needs and increases confidence that the system that we're producing and building here will be effective, while again looking at ways that we can do this more cost effectively. Try and drive down the costs as we improve the effectiveness of the system. And I think there are two bins that I look at here for ways to make that happen. Right? One is to reduce the number of interceptors that we would employ against the set of credible objects. And the other then is to reduce that set of credible objects. And I think as we look at doing that, then we can drive down the size of the inventory necessary, and of course inventory goes to cost, right? So let's look at those two ways that we can make things better. As my boss, the director, has described here, we're doing a couple things on that first bit, right? One that will allow us to reduce the numbers of interceptors, and we get at that several ways. First is to improve the reliability and the capability of the system, and we're making investments in our homeland defense system, primarily our ground-based interceptors, to improve that reliability over the next few years, with investments we're making in that, as well as in the what we're calling the redesigned kill vehicle, or some upgrades to our exo-atmospheric kill vehicle, which is the key business piece of that ground-based interceptor that we use. We're also looking with Rich at ways that we can do a shoot, assess how the battle went, and then shoot again if necessary. And that shoot capability would allow us then to decrease the amount of inventory that we'll need to use. And the third way that we might be able to do that, and there may be others, is to increase the number of kill vehicles that we have on on each one of our boosters. So make each of our boosters more effective, not only by increasing their reliability, but by giving them additional bullets to make that happen. And so we're investing in a multiple object kill vehicle, sort of going back to the future here, that would make that possible. So we're looking at technology today that improves on some of those technology investments we made in the mid-2000s or so for what we called at that time a multiple kill vehicle. We had several prime contractors working. We probably invested on the order of about $600 million over a period of about 5 or 6 years, working on key technologies that would reduce that. Getting long-range acquisition capability that would allow us to see the threat at long range. Getting the propulsive capability so that we could reduce the size of the kill vehicles and add several of them to our boosters. And looking at the way that we might manage that engagement of multiple kill vehicles against a set of credible objects. Now that overall battle management game is one of our key challenges, in that there may be ways not only to do that booster by booster, but to take advantage of Rich's ability to take in all of the sensor data and manage the battle both centrally as well as distributed. So we're looking at those as key possibilities for building this multiple object kill vehicle over the next few years. So we've got some technology investments. What we're doing this summer is we're going to bring in some of the prime contractors, take a look at what concepts, given the set of technology that we have today, what concepts could they build, and where are the key technology investments that they would see necessary in order to eventually get that capability in the next decade. We're going to be working with them over the next 6 months in an intensive way. Rich and I are managing with our systems engineer and our program executive for integration at looking at driving these systems here to get that concept definition work done so that we can begin to make more focused investments over the next few years that will allow us to bring that capability as soon as we can. If we look at that other bin, how do we reduce the number of credible objects that we have to employ interceptors against? One of the techniques that we can use, of course, as we fight in the mid-course, is to improve our ability to discriminate in the mid-course the most lethal objects from those objects which aren't lethal. So as we look at that mid-course picture, it contains spent stages, it may include deployment hardware, it may even include countermeasures meant to spoof our sensor networks to force us to apply more interceptors per those objects. We want to improve our discrimination capability in lots of ways, and of course we're making investments in that, in algorithms as well as terrestrial capability to make that happen. But we know that the more phenomenology we bring into, and of course that's a term in of itself, but bringing not only radar technology, but electro-optical infrared technology into the mix will help Rich get more data about what those objects look like, what their characteristics, what their attributes, whether they're heavy objects or they're less heavy objects, or whether they're spinning objects or whatever. He'll be able to build up that database, and we can begin to make an assessment, given all that data, as to what are truly the lethal objects, improve our discrimination. Right? Now, clearly getting sensor capability electro-optically to match with our radar would be a good feature, and we want to begin to look at how do we add that. So we have been, over the last several years, modifying some of the unmanned aero vehicles that are in theater today with missile defense packages that give them the capability at altitude then to begin to track ballistic missiles. Last year we had modified some Reapers, which are in the theater today, with what they call the multi-spectral targeting system ball, which is an electro-optical sensor. Moved it in front of the Reaper so that we could point it up, and then track targets at the Pacific Missile Range facility that were ballistic, so we'd get a better feel for that. What we saw there was really encouraging, and so we're bringing improvements to that ball, now called the MTS-C ball, a modification of that original ball, and eventually looking at even more advanced sensors from aircraft to begin to get a feel for whether we can use these to close the fire control loop or to help RITS close that fire control loop. Now we know some of these advanced sensors would be very interesting if we could have them in a persistent manner. So having them above the earth is helpful. It gets away from some of the policy challenges of where do we put these sensors. But ultimately, the real goal is to get them in space, where we will have permanent persistence. Right? So we'll be testing these technologies probably from unmanned aircraft over the next few years as we look to whether or not we move the capability to aircraft or whether we move that capability ultimately to space where it could be persistent and most effective for us. Finally, as we look down that scale, I'm going to get back to some of the work that Kelly Hammett and I have been doing together with DARPA here over the last few years. He described pretty eloquently some of the challenges that we faced in our joint work with the airborne laser, and some of the key areas that we're making investments in today in order to avoid or to mitigate some of those challenges that we saw with that aircraft and with that overall system. So we want to move down the scale and bring a boost phase layer to missile defense. In other words, get them before they get to the mid-course and really thin the herd. Now, ultimately, we think that will dramatically reduce the role of interceptors. In other words, the interceptor inventory that would be needed, and the large infrastructure necessary to employ those interceptors. And so we think that all of those investments will ultimately drive the cost down of the missile defense system and build warfighter confidence that we've got an extremely effective system by bringing boost phase layer, by discriminating in the mid-course, and bringing more capability to our overall interceptors. Right now, as Kelly described for you, we moved away from the chemical oxygen iodine laser for all of those reasons that he described. We're focusing our investments today in two key technologies, essentially leveraging the industrial base in solid-state lasers and looking to make improvements in not only the performance, but in the size, weight, and power associated with that, with some very clever schemes that combine the different sets of laser, spectrally and other, to allow us to gang these lasers together and build a very high-power laser. So we've seen tremendous advances over here the last year, going from hundreds of watts to many kilowatts, to tens of kilowatts to hundreds of kilowatts here. And so we're very excited about the work that we've got going with the Air Force and with DARPA in that area. We're also making investments in another interesting laser concept called the diode-pumped alkali laser system, which is a hybrid system which uses a gas as a laser medium. And we're focusing some of our resources at the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, where they're making great strides in improving that capability. And we think that will also has the potential for scaling the high power. So we're focusing in several of those key areas. But another thing that we're going to be doing here, and have just awarded 5 contracts to bring the prime contractors back into the fold with us to look at how they would take this emerging technology and get us to a capability that would allow us to discriminate better, or ultimately to get to the boost phase. So we'll be watching that. We've got them looking at concepts that will allow us to demonstrate by FY 2021 or so that we're moving and able to employ this fascinating and extremely powerful new technology in ways that would make the missile defense system much more effective and less less costly. I think there's tremendous promise there, and we're going to be working together here over these next few years to have that realization.
Thank you, Richard. Okay, we're going to open it up now for an open discussion on any questions you would like to ask. If we could ask you to just identify yourself a little bit to give our speakers an opportunity to understand where you're coming from.
Sure. Bill Goodman, Vice President, Trex Enterprises. Are you familiar with some of the DARPA work we're doing in what's called super 3D lensless imaging for discrimination at distances in the megameter range?
I'm not familiar. I don't want to converse with you specifically about that because I don't have the details on that. But we work with DARPA and we're looking at those kinds of technologies that will get us to that next sort of capability.
Yeah, the program's called Spot It.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Pat Willis with Defense Daily. My question's for Mr. Matlock. If you're going to be going back to the future with your multiple object kill vehicle, what does MDA plan on doing differently this time?
So I think we accomplished a lot in the MKV program, and of course, as you're aware, in 2009, the emphasis and the focus shifted away from the homeland defense battle to the regional defense battle. What we did find in those investments were that there's a strong capability, and we built a strong capability in the propulsion industry to allow us to size the propulsion systems to fit larger and smaller, and much of that work is realized today in our EKV and RKV work. Some of the work that we did in advanced sensors, as a matter of fact, the large format, two-color sensors that are in use today and are in development for our standard missiles were a direct result of that program. We also made some investments in managing the engagements, right? So if you've got a situation where you have many objects and you have a number of kill vehicles that you want to target against those objects, sorting through the ones that may be the most lethal, developing strategies for how you do that, developing strategies for how you maneuver each of these kill vehicles against that separate set of targets. We had some digital simulation work, which was very encouraging there. I think in the near term, we'll probably be making a lot of investments in the digital simulation and the algorithmic work that will make that happen. Now, as I mentioned, we're bringing in several of the prime contractors to take a look with us at that set of technologies that we invested in for MKV, as well as other technologies which have emerged over the last 6 or 7 years since that program was terminated, and see whether there are new concepts which might focus our technology investments in other areas. And so we think that over the next 6 months or so, we're going to get good feedback from the industry base as well as the government reference work that we've been doing here the last year.
Can you tell us who the prime contractors are?
No, that's still in competition, and I don't want to release that yet.
Thanks.
Mark Dawson, Congressman Adderall's office. I was just wondering on the IR sensor on a commercial bus. I was just kind of curious, is that something that's going to be competed? And I was wondering to what extent the existing satellites we have and the UAVs we have, which are very high altitude, why can we not get the information from those items? How much money is it going to cost?
I can answer your question. The first 20 or 22 are already in contract, and they're going to be built and produced. And the trick is, on a UAV, essentially, you have to have it scheduled to be up there all the time, as opposed to, I can't go into details of the satellite constellation, but the constellation's always there, and it's coverage, and it has all the interconnects already with it. So it is the most cost-effective way to go do it. Having a UAV of that, I would have to bring it up, pre-planned, and that's expensive, keeping that over a broad area. I don't know if I answered your question, but.
Well, if we're firing at something and we want to see if we hit it, then that doesn't seem like you have to have persistent 24/7 coverage.
Yes, you do, because you're on alert. You don't know when the enemy's going to shoot, and the shooters are on alert 24/7, 365 days a year. So we want our sensors to be out there at the same time.
And was that contract competed or was it sole sourced?
It was sole source through a R&D. It's a demonstration experiment, so it was sole source.
Okay.
Doesn't mean we wouldn't compete something in the future. Don't get me wrong.
Courtney Allen with Inside the Air Force. In terms of space-based assets in particular, what is the bigger challenge? Is it cost or is it technology development? And do you see that changing here over the next several years? And then one just more specific question: what work within MDA is ongoing for usually a follow-on to PTSS or STSS?
I can take the first part. Both cost and technology development are challenging, and we live with both, and they're both, I wouldn't call them constraints, they're factors that we deal with any of our systems that we are modifying or developing significantly. But it's not a barrier. It's essentially a challenge to not accept the status quo. I mean, you've got one mindset when there is seemingly infinite money out there, access to infinite money. But you also develop a very aggressive, innovative perspective when the TOA, the funding is limited, when you know you have to meet the constraints. So we are living with both, and we are essentially ensuring that the systems that we develop and plan to deploy are affordable and they can meet the requirements. Essentially, the way I call it, under-delivering and not over-promising. I mean, I'm sorry. I said it wrong. Under-promising and over-delivering. Does that help?
Yeah. I guess I wonder, on that same question, do the technology developments enable, reductions in costs?
Absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned that because I was going to mention a couple of things. It's gratifying for me to hear everything that both Riches are talking about here because it's the execution of what was developed a couple of years ago called the BMDS vision. And that has flowed all the way through into the budget, and we can see the very exciting activities that are ongoing here with the MDA. Secondly, there's a very tight relationship between Air Force Space Command and the Air Force Research Lab. Essentially, just last week, we completed at my level, the PEO, TEO, Program Executive Officer, and Technology Executive Officer, Kelly's boss, Joe Masiello, looking to ensure, just like it occurred in the BMDS vision, that activities occurring in the R&D phase, in the labs, have direct application to a program that's meeting a need, that will execute a budget to meet a capability into the future. That's where we essentially take the most risk to get the biggest payoff. We do it early. As Dr. LaPlante said a couple of weeks ago, he said, if you want to go really, really fast, you need to start slow. And at times, slow means spending years in the lab perfecting a capability, demonstrating it on the ground, crawl, walk, run, before you try to deploy it in space or in air. And so a very tight relationship in all the space mission sub-areas to work with the lab. I know there's MDA included to essentially demonstrate capabilities, which then would help to secure funding to provide a program which meets capabilities. So it's a very tight relationship there.
To answer your other question, for us to do our space mission in the mid-course, we need to be at a LEO or MEO altitudes. We need to look at the coldness of space against the target. We've been heavily engaged, again, on a daily basis, I think, with the SBIRS AOA, because that was the to take care of part of the space portfolio, and we're working together with Space Command and the others to figure out, now we got that, what's the next piece? There's some sensor AOAs underway too. So whatever we do, in my perception, it's going to be a collaborative process with the Air Force and across mission areas. So that's why I brought up before that if you're going to afford it, you got to be able to explain how you solve multiple people's problems. So the technical intelligence and the battle space awareness and the missile defense folks have now kind of formed their own union because we all have the same needs and the same environments to go work it through. So I think once the department goes through a lot of the analysis that's underway right now, you'll see a more definitive picture that's coming out.
So you see that need being met through multiple.
Pardon?
What you're saying is basically you see that need being met through multiple.
No, maybe one satellite, but it will support multiple customers.
In the back.
Ezra Knapp from the Journal News Service. The Russians are planning on launching a new satellite constellation later this year to up their own satellite detection system. I'm wondering if their space-based systems will in any way affect or interact with ours or affect the way that we move forward.
That's what I know.
Michael Bray, here at Jet Rocket Down. So this is kind of going back to the future, Rich. As we move left of mid-course towards boost phase, timing range becomes our problem. Persistence becomes our problem. So this is for me and Kelly really. It's so what are we thinking about from the standpoint of sort of space shooters? I mean, we've got persistence and sensors. The only way to get real boost phase intercept on a timing basis is to have something space-based, whether it be lasers or whether it be kill weapons. And I know we dance around this and we go back and forth over the years on space-based assets. Is there any plans that are anybody looking for space-based in Japan for any of our kinetic energy or
For the missile defense agency, that would be going way back to the future.
way back. Look, I'm an old Brave guy, so I know.
I know. So, no, we don't have any intention right now to look at space-based interceptors.
And neither do we.
Well, I mean, you said it with ADL. You need a big aperture, you need lots of power,
Right.
and you don't still have enough standoff range when people start moving their stuff inside. So how do you get to your space?
Well, I mean, you should speak to the MDA vision for that.
So in our game plan, we're looking at, essentially at the airborne systems as a way to tackle boost phase. I don't recall now whether Kelly mentioned, but we flew the 747 at 747 kind of altitudes, and so for the same reasons that Kelly talked about before, for anybody that rides, Delta United / anybody from the West Coast to East Coast knows it get kind of bumpy at that altitude, and so anything that's bumpy for us is going to be tough when you're talking about micro radians, nano radians, or whatever worth pointing to. So we're thinking about much higher unmanned aircraft at much higher altitudes, stratospheric. So not only do we get rid of that challenge of a turbulent and unstable atmosphere, but we also get rid of all the aerosols that we had to deal with in terms of. So those two components really lower the effectiveness of laser. So we're thinking getting very high altitude, long endurance aircraft to do that mission. Again, at much longer ranges than we saw with the airborne laser in terms of actually lasing capability. So I can't talk about many of the detailed performance than to say that we want to get up higher, where there's no weather and no measurable weather and very little turbulence and laser long ranges with aircraft.
Let me just follow up real quick on a question, if I can. Just want to follow up a question. to the panel, what's the tipping point in constrained budgets, limited research development money? When is the tipping point to transfer over to a new technology, whether it's lasers, whether it's satellite persistency, whether it's space-based weapons? When does that happen, or do we have to wait for a catastrophic event before it happens and we fund everything? What's the logic in how we do this?
I'll go first and let Rich just take it up. I think it's thinking about the threat and responding to the threat. I mentioned this BMDS vision. I'm not an MDA anymore, but I mentioned the BMDS vision. That was a comprehensive look across the department. First, dealing with what is the threat, what is the status of our current system, and what do we need to bridge the gap, and then developing a lot of the plans that both Richards talked about here. Crawl, walk, run, demonstrate capability on the ground, do it in the air, and applicable air to space to provide those game-changing technologies. So in no way are we standing by waiting for catastrophic events to happen. We are looking at taking the best threat information that we've got, and then going through the entire process. And development planning is a big part of it. You'll hear a lot about that at the Space and Missile Systems Center and other places, where we look at the threat and decide what do we need to bridge that gap. We talk about disaggregation, we talk about aggregation, we talk about different ways to leverage the commercial sector on building resiliency into our constellations. You'll see us looking at ways to provide protected tactical waveforms over commercial satellites to increase the robustness of links we provide to the warfighters. All that, I think, from a systems of systems perspective, go into making a decision as to when to make that leap. And then demonstrating that we can provide capability against that threat goes a long way in getting the support for the funding you need to provide that military element. So that'll be my answer.
Yeah, that's it.
Do you have enough money, you think, or is that?
I'll just say, I hinted at it earlier, you never have enough, but you may not need enough. I mean, you may not need everything that's out there. What you need to do is formulate a very cogent and consistent, we call it story, that responds to a threat to our livelihood, then requires modifications or new systems to address that threat, and do it far enough in advance where we don't worry about it not being there. And consistency from year to year, I think, is very important in that story.
I think, sorry, go ahead.
Sure. Bruce with Space News. My question is, MDA convinced that it's kind of wrung out as much data as it can from existing sensors that are on orbit and those of international partners. And if not, when might you
Sure.
if you have all that? And then the second part is, if MDA needs new sensors, will we see them on, right? Do you think we'll see the majority of new sensors on hosted payloads, or how might that architecture go
Okay.
going forward?
Back to your first question, I think we're on the road to squeeze every piece of data we can out of the satellites that are up there. The other issue is ultimately, I pointed out before, it's an altitude issue. A lot of the other satellites are geo or higher altitudes. We need sensors that are looking out to the coldness of space. There is not many up there right now to go do that job. So, but there is a desire for that for a lot of missionaries. So the trick is how to pull that together in a set of requirements that can support multiple needs, and then do the development and get the programs launched.
That's DoD-wise.
DoD-wide, right?
But you expect that to be one satellite or series of satellites?
Well, obviously it'd be a constellation of satellites, but it could be, a couple different variations. And whether it's a hosted payload, all depends on it could be a hosted satellite, it can be a unique satellite. Those trades still have to be worked out.
What kind of timeline do you envision on this generation?
I would, off the top of my head, I'd say until 2025, somewhere out there. You could rush to failure, or as General Greaves said, you kind of lay out a program that's consistent, focused, and improve the capabilities along the way.
Yeah, Scott Parks from System Fundamentals. This is for General Greaves and Mr. Ritter. We talked a lot or heard a lot about weapons that are on tight timelines, particularly for blue space, that need a lot of data really fast. Talked about hooking together sensors that can generate a lot of data really fast. Can the two of you comment on the communications architectures that we're looking at to actually get the data from where it is to where it needs to be, that's survivable, anti-jam, all those things that we're looking for the last 30 years in SATCOM?
Joe Greaves kind of hit it on the head on the SATCOM side. We're a big consumer, number one. So there is a lot of protected communications assets coming out there. We use it today to talk to the users and we talk to the other folks. The other trick is there's a lot of data that's got to be fused, whatever. You can clog the links real quick. You've got to send what's the critical pieces of information when you need it, and to go support the shooter. So there's a lot of efforts underway on the satellites. There's a lot of ways on there on the fiber. I can't go into details here and the other thing. So I'm an old communicator, as you know. So I think it's well within the realm to do it. I think there's other things we can look at too. You look at how many on the commercial, I definitely want the military qualified stuff for the tactical fight. And on the other things, there's a lot of commercial assets going on. People talking about, launching 4,000 satellites up there and cellular kinds of capabilities. So I think there's things we may be able to take advantage of in the future to support some of the needs as well between the two.
Let me add, today we've got North Star, we've got advanced DHF providing that super protected, jam resistant, all that capability to the users today. What we're exploring, we call them disadvantaged users who want that, who require that, but because of bandwidth and complexity of the systems don't have it. I mentioned earlier, one of the ways we're trying to do that is a protected tactical waveform, which is satellite agnostic, satellite agnostic, and one of our projects is to demonstrate that capability to provide an increased level of protection to those users in the field. We're also looking at leveraging the very robust infrastructure that the commercial providers have, Intelsat, SES, and whether or not some of that portion can augment the wideband global SATCOM system as an example, and making those trades to determine where, based on the requirement that's sourced in the threat, what that balance ought to be, how much WGS versus how much commercial can be outsourced and enhanced through some sort of particular tactical waveform. So all that work's going on. Maybe that helps. Oh, one last thing, enterprise ground. I forgot to mention that. Joe Hyden has directed us to, these systems grew up, and space systems grew up in a very stovepipe manner. You had space-based infrared, you had wideband global SATCOM, you had advanced DHF, all servicing different customers. We're looking at something called enterprise ground, trying to, as Rich mentioned, bring out the additional capability of the existing systems that we have today through enhancements and optimization of the ground infrastructure. And that work is going on now also.
Tom Giarco, CSIS. I think this question is probably for Mr. Ritter. I think you mentioned at one point the importance of having a mix of ground radars and space. I think most of the emphasis, both from yourself and others, was the additional utility of space. Right now it's just STSS, the idea being getting there. But could you elaborate a little bit more on the importance of having that mix? You said at one point that there's certain benefits you can really get from ground-based radars that are important to keeping that mix, since we're looking at LRDR and all those other things. Could you just articulate a bit about the importance of that diversity?
Well, to a point in this room. The radars do an exquisite job doing on discrimination and small objects and that kind of stuff. We want to maintain that capability. Space has got a way to go in that area. That's one example of some of the differences. And the technology's not there yet. And it'll get there over time. That's one of the key ones in the reality. The other thing, it complicates the enemy. You can put your countermeasures up for IR, countermeasures for radar, or do jamming. But if I can mix up the bag, that makes it more complicated for him to attack. That's about the most I go into details here. But you definitely want to mix, just like any other warfighting missionary.
Major Brian Fram, defense fellow for Congressman Fort Dial. General Greaves, good to see you again, sir. Question for you as you look beyond to the SBIR's follow-on AOA. Have you considered or the challenges regarding to all we have right now with looking at going to distributed and disaggregated architectures and the potential for doing that in missile warning, but going along with that, the challenge if that potentially lowers the threshold to attack of our satellites, where the previous thought was with anything strategic, the enemy attack that, we immediately retaliate up to including nuclear options. So are those things being considered, and are there any other big challenges or big areas that you're looking at in the follow-on to SBIRs?
Great. I think all the effort that's ongoing, looking at distributed and disaggregated architectures, allow the senior leadership decision space. I mean, if you take out one advanced DHF, you've got a big decision to make right away. If we decide in the future that the architecture is better protected in a distributed or disaggregated manner, that would allow potentially for some time to make a decision. It's the analogy that I think of is you deploy the bombers and you still have some time to make a decision to do something other than drop a weapon. If you destroy an advanced DHF, that's a very big deal that requires immediate, I believe, decision making. And the second question was, I'm sorry.
Are there any other considerations as you're going into the SBIR's AOA that include either challenging or other things that you're looking at that might be interesting to this audience as to how that may come out?
Not especially. I mean, we're looking at not only strategic missile warning, missile defense, battle-space awareness, technical intelligence, trying to satisfy those missions from a number of different perspectives. We're looking at maintaining the status quo to distributed architecture, different orbits, all sorts of things, all with an eye on affordability. And we need to develop and deliver a plan that's not only meets the requirements, but is affordable and incredibly affordable into the future. So I wouldn't say there's anything more than that that we should be aware of for this audience.
Kevin. Probably for Rich, I don't know, but there are a number of studies, sensory AOA, service AOA. Is there a target date when you'd like to see all this complete and then begin to make a decision on which direction you're going to step?
SBIRs is coming to a close soon, I would say. On the sensor AOA, probably in the spring time frame. That's what they're targeting for.
The reason I ask,
we don't control them per se, as you well know.
in the context of getting to space, which everyone's hearing you said publicly are going to get to space in the future. Just thinking, when is the start point? Whether that's an additional study or some tangible step where you say, yep, we're going down there.
Probably in the spring time frame, time to influence, upon 18.
One more for one last question, if anyone has a final question in the back row.
Peter Thomas, Representative Adam's office. Talking about this persistent satellite bus-based system for detection or discrimination, what's the cost of that demonstration project going to be? Do we have any idea at this time?
I'm not exactly sure what you're talking about. So there is no program up there per se, so I don't have anything to give you a baseline to give you a cost off.
Okay, so it's being contracted, but we don't know cost.
Are you talking about the kill assessment?
Yeah, I'm sorry, kill assessment.
All right, the kill assessment's a demo program. It's roughly $100 million. Yeah, to get the birds up there, and there's so much to lease them out.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you. On behalf of our alliance and partnerships, we want to thank you for a great panel, great discussion. General, thank you. Thanks for your attention.